Something you mentioned was sitting in the car, which got my attention because I know people who it's kind of I'm wondering, is this a healthy thing or is there a healthy way to do it? Because the whole thing of sitting in the car in the driveway because you don't want to go in the house, it that can't be good. But can we make it good? Because just sitting in the car just to not go in the house is not a good thing. So how can if it's not inherently a bad thing, or maybe it is, but how do we make, because if that's the only time and space that a person can have is let me just sit in the car for a bit before I go in the house, what can they do in the car to make that productive time, that they come out of the car better than they were when they got in it? Welcome to The Main Ingredient, brought to you by Park Road Studios, where we make cooking shows easy. I am your host, Lindsay Ruffin, cooking show advisor and marketing strategist. And my co-host today is Marsha Evans, licensed professional counselor and owner of Willow Tree Counseling and Education Center. Marsha is a licensed therapist. And the reason I keep bringing Marsha back is because mental health is so important. It's such a hugely important part of entrepreneurship, and it is under discussed. Many people start businesses and then find themselves in various stages of mental health crisis because running a business is hard. It's very isolating. And if you don't have self-care practices in place, you can find yourself in a bad place. And Marsha has all kinds of tips, tricks, professional tools that she can share with us to help us enjoy life more. As a business owner, you should be really enjoying your life. That's why we started business, not to be more miserable than we were when we had a day job, and to be the best person that we're capable of being for our friends and family and loved ones. So this is why I keep bringing Marsha back, because she has so much knowledge that can benefit us all. And I thank her so much for continuing to come here and share with us. Welcome. Thank you again, Marsha, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think mental health, and I believe in mental health. Mental health is real. And I think that there's so many things that we can do that people overlook that can bring them balance, peace, contentment. And so I'm glad that I'm on the show and that you continue to flip me upside down to get the coins out of my out of my pockets. So
Yeah,
I appreciate you.
what Marsha's talking about is she just has such an abundance of talent, and I just keep finding out stuff. She doesn't offer it up. You have to just find out. So I told her a while ago, it's like I had to shake her, turn her upside down and shake her, and these just coins just keep coming out. And more coins come out, and I keep finding out more things that she knows how to do, more skills that she has, and the coins keep coming out. So I'm gonna just keep shaking her because we all benefit from it. Today we're going to talk about mental health for entrepreneurs. This is a show about, well, my whole channel is about using cooking shows as a tool for growing your business. So this is a business show. Entrepreneurship is what we discuss here, specifically using cooking shows to build and grow food businesses. And what we're going to do today is look at different phases of entrepreneurship, because a lot of people take a similar journey to the one that I took, where you started out in corporate America and then you ultimately transitioned to entrepreneurship looking for a better life because corporate America is just not working out for you. You're not happy with what you're doing. And there are some I would have benefited from having some self-care practices, and I see so many other people who would have benefited from having some form of self-care practice, because it only gets worse when you go from corporate America to working for yourself, because there's no you will be the worst boss to yourself that you've ever had, because when you start a business, there is no quitting time. If you don't know how to establish some parameters, some guardrails for yourself, you will work yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, worse than any job you've ever had. So what we're going to talk about today are the various stages of entrepreneurship and how you can incorporate mental health practices into your life to carry you forward, so that when you transition to different stages and things may get a little more volatile, at least you have a foundation of some practices that can keep you in a good place. So we're going to start with talking about the employee who has a side hustle. You got a full-time job and you also have a side hustle that you're hoping to grow to the point that you can quit your job. And the two scenarios we're going to discuss is the side hustler who has a family and a side hustler who does not have a family. They're a single person. So for the person who is they're an employee, all these two examples are both employees, and they're not really happy with their job or not happy with it at all. It's a source of significant stress, and they're carrying this stress home, because when you have people who have a family, you leave one job to go directly into your second job, which is your family, your children, your spouse. And when there's no decompression time in between, it's like you are at work all day, you get wound up with the various stressors there, you go straight home, and you're introduced to different types of stresses, the demands of your family. That is a source of stress. Your family's a wonderful resource in your life, but it is a source of stress. So what guidance can you offer, Marsha? How does somebody go when they leave work and then they go straight home, and as soon as they walk in the door, their family is placing all kinds of demands upon them? How does this person take care of themselves?
Right. So that's a good question. I think just being in private practice, I've had a lot of clients that have been in that scenario. So something I kind of talk about with them is the minute they get up, they're 0 to 95, right? They're on the Autobahn. And then when they come home, they don't really get back down to zero until they get in bed and they're asleep. So something I think is really important, it's two things, is how do you put on the brakes before you transition into the house? Or how do you establish a break in the house? So when you come home, you might tell your kids and your partner, hey, I'm going to need 30 minutes, because you can't constantly go 95 miles per hour, 24 hours, 17 hours a day, because you're going to tap into your adrenals. Adrenal fatigue is real. So something that I really communicate to people is implement a break, implement time to transition from one place to the other, so you can really plug into yourself and understand what you need, and you're not transferring that. Number two, I think is really important, is get a therapist or find a way to take a class or something that is going to get you out of the role of being a provider, being a parent, being the 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 provider for a child or elderly parent. But you have to shift out of being the main driver and just being able to be a passenger. So something that I really enjoy for myself is that I'm always teaching. And whenever I go to my self care practices, I am usually the student. And that takes a tremendous amount of pressure off of me, because I don't have to worry about the environment that I'm in, the space, like somebody else is taking care of that. And whenever I can get a client or somebody who is working for somebody and who has a side hustle, whenever they can shift out of that, it is such an amazing feeling for them that they report back of, oh my gosh, I was a student, I didn't have to worry about X, Y, and Z. I could give myself that time. And so those two things that are really important. So it could be a yoga class, it could be a piano class, it could be something that is very fulfilling, that really honors the inner child in you. And if you can't do that, I say stop and be in the driveway for 30 minutes or be somewhere for 30 minutes before you transition back into the house is really important, because you got to give yourself time, because you can't go 95 miles per hour for 17 hours out of the day, 7 days a week. That's impossible, and your body will eventually break down sooner rather than later.
So let's say the family person is able to negotiate this 30-minute buffer with their family. What should they be doing with that time?
Right. So that's a good question. So there's a couple different things you can do. You can put on relaxing music. You could do a guided meditation. You could do breathing. You could do box breathing. You could do breath of fire, where you're like panting like a dog. You can go outside and walk in nature. You could put your feet in the ground and do grounding. Um, you can do yoga. You could do your personal yoga. You can turn off your phone, turn off all notifications, and just sit in your car and just chill out. Um, Sounds can, we don't really pay attention to sounds, but sounds impact us. So if you're constantly in an environment where there are jarring sounds, then your body is picking up on that. So um, it's just kind of bringing yourself back to a place to be still. Stillness is really important. And if you don't enjoy stillness, then there's something that you got to do and figure out why you can't be still, because actually that's not going to work if you transition from working for somebody to working for yourself full time. So you're going to run yourself ragged and be burnt out. So it could be something as simple as breathing. And when you're breathing, you're actually resetting your autonomic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze, to rest and digest. You're giving yourself that opportunity. So the reason that I think the 30 minutes is really important is that you give yourself time, and people think that it's nothing, but it really is. But you're giving yourself time to really reset, find respite in that moment, and then be in a better relationship with yourself, which is really important in all of these categories we're about to discuss. Because if you're not in a good relationship with yourself, then how are you going to run your business? How are you going to run your family effectively? How are you going to be an employee effectively? So giving yourself time to really be in relationship with yourself is really important in that space. It could even be reading a book, but stillness and silence is actually more important. I think is a big thing to give yourself.
The something you mentioned was sitting in the car, which got my attention because I know people who it's kind of I'm wondering, is this a healthy thing, or is there a healthy way to do it? Because the whole thing of sitting in the car in the driveway because you don't want to go in the house, it that can't be good. But can we make it good? Because just sitting in the car just to not go in the house is not a good thing. So how can, if it's not inherently a bad thing, or maybe it is, but how do we make, because if that's the only time and space that a person can have is let me just sit in the car for a bit before I go in the house, what can they do in the car to make that productive time, that they come out of the
Right.
car better than they were when they got in it?
Right. So something they could do is, you can get essential oils. So you know, it just depends on one's personality. So I just came from a walk a few minutes ago, and I was enjoying the breeze. And all my windows were down, and I put my foot out the window, and I just enjoyed the breeze. So one of my elements that I really enjoy, that really talks to me, is wind. So in that moment, I got to engage and really align myself to wind. Yes, Lindsay.
Wait a minute, you put your foot out what window? You walking?
My car window. I was in the car. I went walking on a trail, and when I got back, I was like, "Oh, the weather's really nice." So I was sitting in my car. I put down all my windows and then put my feet out the window. I'm parked, and I'm just enjoying the space but my element that really speaks to me is wind. So for me, wind, the sound of wind really resets my body, and it's almost like a hug, and I feel seen, I feel acknowledged. So that for me, sitting in the car is not an issue. I reconnect with something that if I'm in the house, I don't get to connect with. So
So sit in
sitting
the
in the car,
driveway and put your feet out the window. That's what you telling folks to do.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean it could be different things, but it could be something as simple as getting an essential oil and just, putting some on your wrists with diluted or whatever, but just being able to how do you recreate a space that tends to yourself, right? So some people might sit in and just listen to music. Somebody might sit in and listen to an audiobook, but it's they're giving themselves time, I think, is what's really important. And the way that they can start teaching their family about it is if their family, say one of the children, um, they're in the car with them, you can start implementing 15-minute car time for themselves, right? So they know that when mom or dad pulls up, if they're in the car, they know what that process looks like. And it's all about modeling and educating them. So then they know, okay, they know what self care looks like. They know, okay, I can go somewhere and just tend to myself. So it's not necessarily looked at as a bad thing of like mom or dad doesn't want to come in the house, but they're just tending to themselves. Um, so it could be enjoying their Starbucks coffee or whatever, and they're like, I don't want to share. Sometimes, they don't want to share their food with their partner or their children. So they're just indulging.
I know you work with a lot of families, and the so the training at an early age, because something that you just pointed out was, mom has her time, dad has his time, or whatever. Teaching wellness to what has been your experience with families who are teaching these wellness practices to their children, not as in, okay, mommy needs some quiet time, but as in, you need quiet time as well. Let's, teaching kids yoga, teaching them meditation so that they develop their own centering practices and understand as a result of what it's doing for them. They understand what it means when mom says, okay, now's my time to do my yoga practice, my meditation. So we're going to respect mommy's quiet time because that's what we do. Or dad, like, what has been your experience with families who have taught wellness practices to their children and it's kind of a family thing?
So my experience has been the children, the children that have been taught the importance of wellness and that practice is put into motion in their family and the dynamics of that. I've actually seen the kids checking the parents when the parents are moving a little bit too fast or when they feel like they have to check these boxes. I've seen where children have told their parents, hey, I don't want to go here. This is not really a place that I really want to um, go and participate because it's not good for me and my mental health. Or children have been able to identify faster what's healthy and what's unhealthy, what person is healthy or unhealthy or a situation. And so whenever parents implement that wellness practice, it really gives the kid an opportunity to communicate. Like the kids are now individuals and not seen as kids when it comes to their mental health and what's good and what's not. And parents really listen to their kids and the feedback that they have. I know in the DC area, it is a rat race. And it's just been very amazing to see kids at all levels to tell their parents, hey, I don't want to go to this birthday party. I don't care who invited me. And the parents like listen. Sometimes I see parents like push back of like, no, you have to do this. Um, and then when they sit down and have a conversation, even if they try to go, usually things will happen where the parents will have conversations with the kids after the fact and was like, they apologize. The parents apologize and say, I should have listened to you. Um, but the kids have a way to check the parents when parents are implementing this wellness practice into their family. I've seen a lot of positive feedback, and kids being able to have this voice to advocate, but also they've been able to identify what wellness looks like for them, and parents starting to listen to their voice. I'm a big proponent for PTO for my kids, like them taking mental health days, because where will they ever get to understand that? And I always tell my parents, hey, you have to show them what that looks like. So if you take off and they don't know you're taking a mental health day, where are they going to learn it? When they're burnt out, when they are navigating a space as an adult and they don't feel compelled to take off for their mental health. And so when I see parents being able to implement that and give them, they'll give them a day, they'll give them, some of my parents have given them like, hey, you have 12 days a school year. So then they get to manage that. And so then they have this level of autonomy based off their mental health and their physical health.
So it sounds like if we incorporate wellness as a family practice, it brings everybody's stress level down and gives everybody tools for managing their emotions better.
Yes. Yeah, it does.
You mentioned the PTO and mental health days. Let's talk about corporate wellness and what employers can do to be a part of helping their employees maintain a state of good mental wellness. I know you offer corporate wellness services. What does wellness look like in the context of in a corporate environment? How can an employer, what kind of programs can they set up? What do you offer that an employer can bring to their employees to facilitate better mental health care, just in general at the office? How does corporate wellness work? Basically, is what I'm asking.
So I think what's really important is for people to understand their cortisol, like just their stress level. I think that's really important. And so what I do is just kind of getting one to understand, getting them back in their body, because we are a society that's outside our bodies. So through my corporate wellness experience is really being able to get one to relax, and for them to get back into, it goes back into being in relationship with their body. So I feel like if an employee, somebody who works at an organization, is inside, they're more in their body, then they can be a better person professionally and personally. And so one of the things that I do is really get in, it might be sound healing, it might be yoga, it might be breathing, and then being able to get in their body and really start seeing what are their factors, the stress factors. What's the things that trigger them? Is it communication? Is it teamwork, on the level in their corporation that they work for? What are those things? And then we can kind of look at time management. How do they interact? So if you're very stressed, for example, and your cortisol level is high, then you're not going to necessarily take constructive criticism. You can't take feedback, and you're not going to be able to hear because you're in this fight or flight. So you actually think that you're in danger. So which really impacts work and team and collaboration. And so through that, it's just kind of being able to identify, if we're working with the team, being able to identify the blind spots in a team collaboration. And so being able to work through that. And so it could be communication. But my first thing is, how do we get to wellness? How do we lower the cortisol? How do we get you back into your body to understand how to navigate these places? And I think that corporations are starting to understand, but I think that it's difficult to understand. How do you talk about cortisol versus productivity, right? And so it's getting people to understand that cortisol plays a factor in every aspect of your life. You know.
What would you what would your advice be to an employer? Like, what is the main thing or the main couple of things that you see employers getting wrong when it pertains to mental health for their employees, aside from just completely ignoring it altogether. But so there's that. But what what other things do you see that, maybe a top one or two or three things that employers are getting wrong when it comes to the mental health of their employees?
Yeah, I think that it's like they ignore it, but I think also they put it out there, but they don't really they don't really it's almost like when people talk about self-care, right? Um it's like self-care is important, but it's almost like this cliche word, right? It's a cliche phrase. And I think that it's similar with some corporations that it's like, hey, we're doing this for mental health, but I don't think they do a good job of a welcoming. It's not as welcoming. It's people are fearful to talk about mental health. One of the things that I see is there's certain generations that are more inclined to talk about it. The younger generations have been in counseling since they were young, like middle school. Um, and so I think that there is a they don't want to step too much into it. I think that there's a fear. I think with suicide at the rate that it is, I think that there's a fear of stepping into mental health because it's so private. But I think some employees are like jobs, companies are not opening up a little bit more to have more conversation about it because I don't think that they're as trained to what if somebody opened up and shared something very traumatic. I think it's a very much a place that um, people are not as trained to navigate the spaces that I think some workers are willing to go to just kind of get it off their chest, if that makes sense. Um, yeah.
So what does an employer do? Let's say you have a dozen employees, because like there's a range. You start out and it's just you, and then you have somebody part-time help or whatever, and then your company starts to grow, and you end up with two or three employees, half a dozen. There's this range, let's say from one employee to up to 20, 30, maybe even 50, where you just don't have anybody on staff who has those qualifications that you described. So
Right.
what does this business owner do? What is available to them to provide mental health resources to their employees, even though they're not gonna have somebody on staff full time doing this?
Right. So I think there's a couple of different things. So there's, depending on their plan, there's employment assistance program. They have EAP, which they get like 6 free therapy sessions sometimes or more. But I think what's really important is I think that, and we kind of talked about this in the last conversation, but having groups check in, having a weekly group of, hey, this is, you're not going to be penalized, and maybe even having somebody come in or twice a month where they can just kind of talk, right? It could be something virtual, it could be before, it could be almost like how people have prayer in the morning times, but like with their pastor, but just being able to have a space where I think that you can just come and talk. You can come and vent. And if something is too heavy or they need more assistance, I think it's really important to have resources of therapists, people that are willing to accept your employees. I know that um, I have one of my really close friends who's a therapist and practices similarly than I do. We practice similar. Um, I know if I need to refer a client to her, she's going to take that client, and it's vice versa. And so, one of the things I think is important for that type of business is being able to connect with maybe two or three therapists of saying, "Hey, can we have an agreement that if one of my workers needs therapy, can you make sure that there's a spot for them, right?" And I think that that's really important. And 9 times out of 10, a therapist will be like, "Yeah," because they know you and they know what workers you have working for you. And I think that's really important. but it's really important for the person who is growing their business to establish a relationship with two or three therapists, or even, a psychiatrist, or even a primary care, because it's all about building a team, a wellness team, which is really important. And that's something that I do in corporate wellness is you have to have a wellness team, because you can't navigate, you don't know everything that's going on with your body. You need other people who are experts. So all you got to do is bring your concerns to them, and they can be like, oh, this is this, and the third.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the business owner themselves, which that could be the business owner who has employees, or it could be the person who has left their job. They got their business to the point where they were able to quit their job, and now they're working full time for themselves. What kind of wellness practices do you recommend for a small business owner? Because these are the people who, in my experience, just run themselves into the ground. They start businesses to supposedly create a better life, and then create a much worse life than the one that they had. And depending on the type of business that you started, you've taken on a bunch of debt. So now you have all of these financial obligations that are weighing more heavily on you than when you had a job. You didn't have all of this. Now you have, your freedom, quote unquote, but that freedom is extremely costly. What kind of wellness practices do you recommend for typical entrepreneurs?
Um, yeah, that varies. I mean, it depends on where they are, but I it goes back to having a wellness team. Something that's big on that is being able to have 4 or 5 people on your wellness team that you at least see monthly or every 6 weeks. So what they're going to do is catch you in different intervals throughout your day and throughout your week based on your availability. But I think being able to have the 4 to 5 people um, see, it could be your yoga teacher, it could be your chiropractor, it could be a wellness, a holistic doctor. But it's really important to have at least 4 or 5 people on your team for yourself that is there to support you. And when I say that is like I had an acupuncturist, and I remember that I had like swelling in my ankle, and she was like, "Hey, you need to go to a nutritionist." I went to the nutritionist that was a floor up from my acupuncturist, and she was like, "Hey, you're vitamin D deficient. I need you to go to the chiropractor, and I need you to go to your PCP and ask for a vitamin D test." And those people at that moment became a part of my wellness team. And so I went to my nutritionist, and she helped me create a plan. And that's when I first started my business. She was like, "Hey, you need to get some sleep." And we worked through how I could eat semi healthy given my busy work schedule. And in that wellness team, it gives you an opportunity to share, but also those people get to understand you and get to know you. And I think that's really important for somebody who is running their business. I'm somebody who used to work 60 hours a week, but I found time to implement that into my week. I even had a massage twice a week, um, because my body wouldn't relax the first session. So it's really important, I think, for entrepreneurs to have a wellness team and be able to see them on a regular basis, because they will catch things that are in your blind spots that you won't catch. And that's important. And then you get to be the student, or you get to be in the passenger seat, and that expert gets to guide your life in that moment, in that hour, for your overall wellness, personally and professionally. And they're helping you be successful in your business.
Something I want to add on to that is, as far as the wellness team, it should not. I want people to not just be thinking about wellness professionals, because that wellness team can and should include just regular people, business owners, because running a business, the surprise that a lot of people find the unpleasant surprise is that it is extremely isolating. When you, man, this neighbor's dog out here barking. When you have a job, you go to work and there's all these people. You have a water cooler. You have a commute and you get to work and then you're interacting with whoever it is you're interacting with. And you may not like those people very much, but when you start a business and now you're working by yourself all the time, you come to find that maybe that human interaction wasn't so bad. Many business owners find that they're a huge part of the struggle of running their business is the isolation. You just, especially if you have a business that is where you're working from home, for example, and there's lots of those businesses these days where you can work from home and really have no interaction with people, no face to face interaction with people, and if it will mess with you over time. You just don't have anyone to talk to. If your entire circle of connections are people who have a job, they don't understand entrepreneurship. You can't come to them with any of your problems or discuss any of your challenges because they don't get it. Even if they're willing to listen and offer you some advice, it's always terrible advice because they've never run a business. If you've never had to go out into the world and earn your living and pay your bills by interacting with strangers and getting them to pay you money for a product or a service you have, if you've never done that, you really just have no idea what this world is like. And many people leave corporate America, start a business, and they have no network of people who are living like they're living. And it's extremely isolating. So what I would encourage people to do is join a business group of some sort. And you're probably going to have to go through a few different groups to find the one that's right for you. You may have to start one yourself. But the most important thing is that you should have some other business owners in your circle who you're interacting with regularly. And by regularly, I would say at least weekly. You need to be having a check-in meeting with somebody who runs a business, who's, they're in the same type of, not same work that you're in, but they're full-time business owners, so that you guys can just vent and communicate and brainstorm. And it's man, this dog, it's extremely important. So don't think that your wellness team is just wellness professionals. We as human beings deliver wellness to each other just through social interaction. We're wired to communicate and engage each other. And if you do not deliberately set out to build a team of people so that you're not operating alone as an entrepreneur, by default, you will be operating alone as an entrepreneur, and it will start to wear on your health. You just you just don't want to be out in these woods by yourself. And that's what happens if you don't deliberately set out to have a team with you, or
Yeah,
to build a
that
team.
happened to me. That happened. Yeah. So my first 5 years, I put my head down, and I didn't have, because when I started my business, it wasn't a thing to be in business. I was young. Everybody else was trying to grow, to climb the corporate ladder, and for 5 years, it was that way. And to the point that I went back. I went into the school system, and I still had my business full time, but it was to connect with people on a social level. Um, and I needed it, but I didn't know that. And so I could see the difference now, having a coach, having coaches, being able to talk, making sure that I talk with other entrepreneurs. It's a different energy that I get, and it's a necessity. And I make sure and I try to go out there and connect with people who are like-minded in their approach with their entrepreneurship, like just navigating that path. Um, and I feel like I have a family. I feel like very seen and acknowledged, and I feel like I'm not speaking a foreign language to others when they're on the same path. I might have a little bit more years in them, but years than them in the entrepreneur space, but they've they've done something right where it's like, hey, I got to have this community where I didn't do that. And it was very lonely. Um, but you're absolutely right, Lindsay. It is very important.
So for our final entrepreneur that we're going to talk about, final stage of entrepreneurship, let's talk about the entrepreneur who has found success. They've worked and worked and worked and figured it out, and they've been able to create the success for themselves that they had in mind. And now they find themselves in the situation where they have everything they want except peace. They're just not happy. Money's no longer a concern for them. They've bought everything. They have everything. They can go anywhere, anytime they want. And no matter where they go, no matter what they do, they find themselves unhappy and unfulfilled. What can you offer? What kind of guidance or suggestions can you offer to a person in that situation?
Um, I think what's really important in that space is I would tell them to get into therapy. I know that that might sound like that's not the answer, but I've seen that. Recently just had a conversation with someone and they talked about being numb, but I think also not being able to recognize that they're unhappy or they don't have peace. Because some people don't identify with those words. They think that having things brings them peace, but there's this emptiness, there's this hollowness that they're feeling. One of the things I think is really important is to go to therapy or to seek healing, because a lot of times it goes back to your childhood, right? It goes back to those places that these wounds that you've covered up with your success. And so, one of the things I think is really important is to sit in solitude and it goes back to Lindsay, for real, really, it goes back to um, being in relationship with yourself, because you've been doing these things, being successful, checking off these boxes, but there's still been this emptiness and this hollowness or this numbness um, that still fills you up. And those feelings sometimes can be very scary, because nobody wants to sit with those uncomfortable feelings. And a lot of times it's the thought of nobody knows that you feel that way because you've been so successful. And so I think that one of the very safe places is therapy, because you get to take off the mask, something that you spoke about earlier. You get to take off the mask, the costume, and really sit with yourself of what do you want life to look like now moving forward. But it really is coming to terms with those feelings. Everybody might describe it differently, but this one person I was talking to was describing it as numbness, and that they are okay with the numbness, because if they go into their emotional bag, the world can't the world is not going to keep them safe. And so I think it's being able to go into a space where they can feel safe for an hour to kind of unload. But also, I think being able to start identifying and putting words to some of those feelings would be probably the best place to start. So, yeah.
Now it's a car outside blasting. I swear it's always something. Um, you made some really important points there, because in my work I've routinely encountered very seasoned chefs. They've been in the business for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, sometimes. And where they find themselves is at the top of the food chain. They're the person who solves all the problems for everyone, and they have no counsel to refer to. So when they need help, and so you promoting getting a therapist, I very much support that. Hang on one second. It's always something. I very much endorse getting a therapist. This is how that person who's put themselves at the top and doesn't have any counsel and doesn't have anybody who they can turn to, this is where you can go to get that counsel and not put yourself at risk, because in these folks' world they have to be Superman or Superwoman, and for them to expose their vulnerabilities can compromise a whole bunch of things, and and undermine everything they worked so hard to create. So I very much understand that, and that's why you get a therapist, somebody who you can have those conversations with, and it without penalty. You you feel better from having communicated. You learn some tools, and very often it's just a different perspective on something. You look at the same thing a different way, and then you have a different reaction to it, and you're able to process it differently. So, yeah, I would absolutely encourage any of the individuals that we're describing, the folks who are at the top of your game, and you don't find yourself happy or fulfilled. Some time with a therapist may very well help you. Adding a therapist to your team and just engaging that individual on an ongoing basis can prove to be very helpful. So,
Yeah, and I also think that because of the success of that woman or man, I think that I don't think talk therapy can be an ingredient into their therapy, but I think it has to be a very much like unorthodox modality in a way, because that person who's at the top of the food chain, they have logic, they're successful. Like, for them to get to the place that they've gotten, they know how to process things. So I say this because I've worked with different people, I've communicated with different people, and there's a certain mindset of people who are highly successful. So one of the things I think is something, I do something called root cause therapy that deals with the kinesiology of your body. So your body keeps the score. So I can clear through the root cause therapy, I can clear a limiting belief in your body in 90 seconds. And that is relying solely on your body and just dealing with your unconscious and your conscious. And that's really important. You can afterwards talk about it, but talk therapy for those people that are at the top of the food chain. You can rationalize, you can understand. It's not going it's going to have a little bit of success. But I think being able to do something called EMDR that really works with reprogramming the thoughts and experiences that have come to your body through your eyes. I think talk therapy needs to be a proponent of it, but I think you have to navigate and do another modality that gets you in your body so you can free your body of things that you're carrying. So, people at the top of the food chain, talk therapy is good for a little bit, but it's being able to do something different that really encompasses every part of your body, not just your brain, because you can process a lot of stuff, and that's why you are where you are.
thank you for adding that, because most lay people like me, we know talk therapy, and that's the only form of therapy we know of. And that's, there's so many more variations of therapy that most folks don't know anything about. And so it was very important that you share that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we covered quite a bit of ground today, Marsha. Is there anything that I did not ask about that I should have, or anything that you want to add, circle back on anything?
Um, One of the things I think that because mental health is important, people talk about it, and I think that there's certain groups of people that feel like mental health is a luxury to people, like a luxury to a certain class of people. And I'm here to say that mental health is for everybody. And I think that once people can get past the initial, you'll realize that it's for you, right? One of the things that I really do is I have a consultation appointment free of charge. And they can ask any questions. There's nothing that is off limits. But getting to know me, because I will be somebody that is going to enter into their world. And that's something that I say is, hey, I'm a guest into your world. So however much you share is however much I can dance with you and walk with you in this journey. And I give them how I approach things. And I think that that's really important. And once you can get past the whole like word of a mental health therapist or going to counseling, you get to really make it a therapy session. You get to make it your own. And that's really important. There's, I have people who might call me a different name in the therapy session, but they need that. And I think what's really important is when you find a therapist, you have to really think about what you need to be able to open up. And a lot of times we don't need that. But I want you just to think about a really good friend or a really good family member that you're really close to, and think about the characteristics and their personality that allows you to be open with that person and allows you to be you. And that's what you would want in a therapist, so you can just you can heal and you can open up. And I think that encompasses everybody that we talked about during today's session. But I think that mental health is mental health therapy is for everybody. Being able to have somebody on their team. I have two people who I go to on a regular, and then there's another person that I might go to for a maintenance check-in twice a year. So it's really important. But just getting past those words, and once you get past those words, you are in charge of what you want it to look like and how you want it to come about. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining today and bringing so much expertise, Marsha. What I want to encourage everyone to do is, if you have questions, leave a comment. We're going to have Marsha on regularly, and your comments will help determine the topics that we cover. Let us know what you need help with. Maybe Marsha shared something today that resonated with you, or maybe we didn't cover in any way something that is important to you and that you need help with. And the comment section is where you get to participate in the show and help guide its direction, so that we're bringing you content and information that's relevant to you. So please leave a comment if you want to contribute. As this is a business show, we do cooking shows here, and as always, I want to remind you that you can change your life with a cooking show whenever you decide to. And when that time comes, use the link in the description box and reach out to me, and I'll give you some guidance on how to get started. If you want to learn more about Marsha, again, check the description box. There will be a link to Marsha's YouTube channel. And we thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.